In today's video, we'll be learning about the executive functioning strategy, working clocks. The goal of the working clock strategy is to create a visual representation of time. Making time visual helps students understand how long they need to sustain attention for and the amount of time they will have to complete a task. The working clock strategy supports the development of a variety of executive functioning skills, such as task initiation, sustained attention, self-monitoring, and planning. There are relatively few resources needed to start implementing this strategy. If you have a glass-faced clock, you can use dry erase expo markers to create your visual representation of time. If you're accustomed to using smartboards, TVs, or other forms of technology, you can project an online clock. Online clock resources can be found in your one-page handout. The first step is to determine the amount of time students will need to complete a task, or how long you expect them to sustain attention to a task or activity. Remember to account for the time students will need to get ready for the task and the amount of time students will need to clean up when finished. The working clock on the left distinguished getting ready time from working time to done time or cleaning up time. However, it is not required to make this distinction when using the strategy. The second step is to create your time markers. To do this, you mark your starting time and ending time. It may also be helpful to mark your midpoint time. By marking the midpoint, you create an opportunity for students to self-monitor and evaluate performance during task completion. For example, if their job is to complete 20 problems, they could create a midpoint goal of completing 10. Lastly, we shade the clock in using 5-minute increments to help visually demonstrate the passage of time. So if your students had 20 minutes to complete 20 math problems, while shading the clock, you might say something like, we have 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes to complete 20 problems. Then go back and say by our midpoint, which is in 5, 10 minutes, we should have at least 10 problems done. Continually increase the students' involvement in the planning process as they become more familiar with the working clock model. It's important that students get a chance to do the thinking as well. If we continue with our last example, we could increase student involvement by saying, okay, we have 20 minutes to complete 20 math problems. How many should we have done by our midway point? The next step might seem obvious, but is often forgotten. It's absolutely essential that the clock and time markers are visible to students at all times so they're able to reference them as they monitor their own performance. Furthermore, when working, we should prompt students to reference the clock to monitor their plan. For example, we could say something like, we've been working for 10 minutes, which means we're at our midpoint. Tell me how many problems you have done. When creating your working clock plan, it might also be helpful to add a if I'm stuck component to make sure students are using their time effectively. For example, you can say, if while working you get stuck, you can raise your hand and wait for me to come over. While you're waiting for me, you can continue working on the next problem. You can also talk to students about other things that might interfere with them completing the task on time. We like to call these time robbers. Time robbers are things such as looking at your phone, talking to your friend, or anything else that might take up your time. These time robbers help kids show why they're not completing their tasks on time and how long they're spending engaging in these other activities. Before we let you go, here's a video of a second grade classroom in which the teacher used the working clock strategy to shorten the amount of time it took students to get their materials out and ready for a task. The teacher reported prior to using the working clock strategy, it was taking students about 3 minutes to get their materials ready. After the strategy, she reported it took students less than a minute.